The rain wasn't just falling, it was a solid, liquid wall against the windows, drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof of her small house. Zara had always found a strange comfort in storms, the world outside matching the carefully contained chaos inside. But not tonight. Tonight, the sound was a prelude, a warning. She smoothed the light pink fabric of her dress, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break. It was a simple thing, cotton and modestly cut, something a mother would wear. And she was a mother before she was anything else. A sudden, sharp knock echoed through the house, so loud it seemed to vibrate in her bones. It was too late for visitors, too forceful for a neighbor. She froze, her hand hovering over the storybook she was about to read. From the small, shared bedroom, two identical sets of wide, dark eyes peered out at her. "Mommy." Hannah's voice was a whisper, laced with the sleep she was fighting. "Who is it?" Dury asked, always the bolder one, her small frame already squared for a fight. "It's nothing, babies." Probably just the wind. Zara forced a smile that felt brittle. But she knew it wasn't the wind. The wind didn't knock with such precise, impatient authority. She moved toward the front door, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden floor. Each step was a negotiation with the past, a prayer that the life she had so painstakingly built over 7 years was not about to be dismantled. Through the peephole, all she could see was darkness and the distorted shimmer of rain on the lens. She hesitated, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. The knock came again, harder this time. An order. Taking a deep breath, she unlatched the deadbolt. The click was deafening in the sudden silence between thunderclaps. She opened the door a crack, her body braced to slam it shut. And there he was, Jinwoo Kwon. The rain had plastered his black hair to his forehead, and his suit, a tailored masterpiece of dark wool that probably cost more than her car, was soaked through. But he seemed impervious to it, a statue carved from granite and fury. Water dripped from the sharp line of his jaw, tracing a path down his throat to the stark white of his collar. He hadn't aged. Or perhaps men like him didn't age. They weathered, becoming harder, sharper, more dangerous with time. His eyes found hers, and the world tilted. They were the same eyes she saw every morning, the same deep, obsidian black she kissed goodnight every evening. But on his face, they held no childish wonder. They held the cold, calculating weight of an empire built on secrets and blood. "Zara," he said. Her name was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a claim of ownership she had run from for 7 years. Her throat was tight, her voice a stranger to her own ears. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" He ignored her questions, his gaze sweeping past her, into the warm, dim light of her home. It was a small, humble place, a worn but comfortable sofa, framed crayon drawings on the walls, a stack of picture books on the coffee table. It was a world he didn't belong in, and his very presence felt like a violation, a smear of darkness on her carefully curated piece. "May I come in?" It was phrased as a question, but the tone was absolute. He was already moving, forcing her to step back or be run over. He moved like the room owed him space. He stepped across the threshold, bringing the scent of rain and cold ambition into her home. His polished leather shoes, impossibly clean despite the storm, made no sound on her rug. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in together. The silence that fell was heavy, thick with everything left unsaid for 2,555 days. "You've been difficult to find," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the small space. He was looking at the drawings on the wall, his expression unreadable. "That was the point," she managed to say, wrapping her arms around herself. The pink dress suddenly felt flimsy, inadequate armor against him. "Mommy, I'm Festi." The small voice broke the spell. Both of their heads snapped toward the hallway. Standing there, side by side, were Hannah and Dury. They were a match set in their little red dresses, their dark hair in identical braids, their faces a perfect, miniature blend of hers and his. They stared at the tall, imposing stranger in their living room, their thumbs creeping toward their mouths. Zara's blood ran cold. She had played this moment out in her nightmares 1,000 times, but the reality was infinitely worse. The slow, deliberate way Jin Woo's eyes moved from her face to the two girls was terrifying. He didn't react at first.
He was too controlled for that.
But she saw it, a flicker in the depths of his gaze, a subtle tightening of the muscles in his jaw. He was calculating.
Processing.
He looked from Duri's defiant stance to Hannah's shy curiosity. He saw their eyes, his eyes. He saw the shape of their faces, the stubborn set of their chins. He was a man who dealt in facts and patterns, and the evidence standing before him was undeniable. His gaze lifted, meeting hers again. The coldness was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. It was a raw, possessive fire that stripped her bare. "How old are they?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft.
She couldn't speak.
Her throat had closed up completely. The lie she had practiced, the one where she would claim they belonged to a kind, boring man who had left her, evaporated on her tongue. It would have been useless anyway. He would know. He took a step forward, and she instinctively moved to block him, placing herself between him and her children. It was a futile gesture. He was a wolf, and she was, what? A lamb pretending she had teeth. "Zara," he repeated, the single word a command. "Tell me." "7," she whispered, the admission tasting like defeat. His face remained a mask, but she saw his shoulders tense. 7 years. He did the math in an instant. 7 years since that night in his sterile, glass-walled apartment. 7 years since she had seen him with her sister, Naomi. Their bodies close, his hand on her sister's throat in a gesture Zara had mistaken for a dark caress. 7 years since she had packed a single bag and vanished, disappearing from his world so completely she had almost convinced herself she had never been a part of it. "Go to your room, babies," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Mommy needs to talk to the guest." Hannah and Duri exchanged a look, then scurried back into their bedroom, closing the door behind them. The sound of their muffled whispers was a painful reminder of what was at stake. Jin Woo's focus was absolute. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she felt the years peel away. He was not just the man she had fled. He was the father of her children. That fact changed the air in the room, solidifying into a chain that bound them together more tightly than any shared memory or fleeting affection ever could. "We need to talk," he said, and it was not a suggestion. It was the beginning of a reckoning. He unbuttoned his soaked suit jacket, the movement fluid and precise. He was making himself at home in the ruins of her life. He didn't wait for her permission. He walked into her small living room, his presence dwarfing the furniture. He ran a hand over the worn armchair, his expression unreadable. To him, this must have looked like a hovel, a temporary shelter she had crawled into after leaving his palace of steel and glass. He didn't understand that this was her sanctuary, the only home her daughters had ever known. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his back to her. He was examining a photograph on the mantelpiece. Zara and the girls at a pumpkin patch, their faces bright with laughter. A life he had no part in. "Why would I?" The question came out sharper than she intended, fueled by a surge of long-suppressed anger. "You were busy. With my sister." He turned slowly. There was no apology in his eyes, no remorse. There was only a cold, hard clarity. "What you saw that night was not what you thought it was." "It doesn't matter what I thought," she shot back, her voice rising. "I saw what I saw. I left. I made a life for myself. For them." "This is not a life," he said, the words a quiet, brutal dismissal of everything she had built. "This is a hiding place. And it's no longer safe." A chill unrelated to the storm outside crept down her spine. "What are you talking about? Finding you was not just a personal matter. Others knew I was looking. My enemies. They are not as sentimental as I am." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "They now know where to find you. And them." The threat was unmistakable, and it worked exactly as he intended. The anger in her chest curdled into pure, unadulterated fear. It was one thing to put herself at risk, but her daughters were another matter entirely. They were the line she would die to protect. "You brought this to my door," she accused, her voice trembling with a rage born of terror. "You and your world. And I am the only one who can protect you from it," he countered smoothly. He took another step closer, invading her space. She could smell his cologne, a subtle, expensive scent of cedar and smoke that was achingly familiar. It was the scent of her past, of late nights and tangled sheets and a danger she had been too young and naive to fully comprehend. Naomi was a liability. She was selling information to the Japanese, to the Sato clan. Zara flinched at her sister's name. They hadn't spoken since that night. Naomi had tried to call, to explain, but Zara had blocked her number, cut her out completely. The night you left, Jinwoo continued, his voice low and intimate. I was not being intimate with your sister. I was confronting her. She betrayed me. She betrayed our family. Zara wanted to call him a liar. She wanted to scream at him, to throw him out into the storm where he belonged. But the conviction in his voice was chilling. It had the hard, unvarnished ring of truth.
And it explained so much.
The look on Naomi's face that night hadn't been passion, it had been terror. She tried to use you as leverage, he added, his eyes boring into hers. She offered you to them in exchange for her own safety. The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. Naomi, her own sister. I dealt with the situation, he said. The finality in his tone left no room for interpretation. He meant he had eliminated the threat. He meant he had eliminated her sister. The room swam. She leaned against the wall for support, her legs suddenly weak. This was the man she had created a family with. A killer. A monster who spoke of her sister's death as if it were a business transaction. She should run. She should grab her children and scream for help until the whole neighborhood came running. But as if on cue, the slow, deliberate crawl of headlights washed across her living room window. A dark sedan, sleek and expensive, sat parked across the street. It hadn't been there moments before. Jinwoo didn't even turn to look. He had felt it, the same way an animal senses a predator. They're here, he said calmly. His hand went to the inside of his jacket, and the quiet, metallic click of a gun's safety being released was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The world narrowed to this small room, to the man in front of her and the threat outside. He was danger, yes. He was the storm, but he was also the only available harbor. She had a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. The police would be useless against men like these. Running would only get her and her daughters killed. Her gaze fell on the butcher block in her tiny kitchen, the handle of the largest knife gleaming in the dim light. Her mind, which had been reeling in shock and horror, suddenly became sharp, focused. The girls were asleep in the back room. They were her only priority. Jinwoo was already moving toward the door, his body a study in lethal grace. He was a creature of this world, of violence and shadows. She was not, but a mother protecting her children could become anything. She made her choice. Without a word, she crossed to the kitchen, her hand closing around the cool, heavy handle of the chef's knife. It felt foreign and clumsy in her grip, but it was something. She moved to stand at the entrance of the hallway that led to the bedrooms, planting her feet. She was a sentry, a final line of defense. If anyone got past him, they would have to go through her. It was a morally gray decision, an alignment with the darkness she had spent 7 years running from. She was choosing the monster she knew. She was choosing the father of her children. And in that moment, she crossed a line she could never uncross. Jinwoo glanced back at her, at the knife in her hand, at the fierce, desperate resolve in her eyes. He didn't smile, but something shifted in his expression.
It was a flicker of respect.
Of understanding. He saw her not as a victim, not as a past lover, but as an ally. The front door splintered inwards, kicked off its hinges with a deafening crack. 2 men spilled into the room, dressed in black, their faces grim. They moved with a practiced efficiency that spoke of countless other nights like this one. But they had not counted on Jinwoo Quan being ready. The room exploded in a blur of motion and sound. It was not a chaotic brawl. It was a surgical, brutal ballet. Jinwoo moved with an economy of violence she found both horrifying and mesmerizing. A gunshot, muffled by the storm, was a punctuation mark. 1 man crumpled to the floor. The second man was faster. He lunged past Jinwoo, his target clear. Her. He saw her as the weak point, the leverage. His eyes were cold, empty. Zara raised the knife, her hand trembling, but she did not back down.
She was too slow.
He was almost on her when a dark shape intercepted him. Jin-woo threw himself between them, taking the man's upward slash on his own arm. A line of red bloomed across the sleeve of his expensive suit. He didn't even grunt. With a single, fluid motion, he disarmed the man, and the confrontation was over as quickly as it had begun. The second man joined the first on her floor. Silence descended, broken only by the rain and her own ragged breathing. Jin-woo stood over the two men, his chest rising and falling. He looked at the deep gash on his forearm, then at her. He had shielded her. He had bled for her. The adrenaline receded, leaving a tremor in its wake. She dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor. Miraculously, the girls had not woken up. The storm had covered the noise. "Are you all right?" His voice was rough. She could only nod, her words trapped in her throat. He walked over to the man he had shot and retrieved a piece of paper from his pocket. He read it, and his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He held it out for her to see. It was a photograph of her and the girls, taken from a distance, in the park just last week. On the back, a message was scrawled in neat handwriting. "We know what you found. A man's children are his greatest weakness." They weren't just targeting him anymore. They were targeting her. They were targeting his daughters. Her daughters. Later, after his men had arrived in their silent, black cars to clean up the mess, the house felt both violated and strangely calm. The bodies were gone, the broken door temporarily patched. It was as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She found her voice and her nerve, pulling out the small first aid kit she kept under the sink. "Sit down," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. For the first time since he had arrived, Jin-woo looked surprised. But he did as he was told, sitting at her small kitchen table while she cut away the ruined fabric of his sleeve. The cut was deep, clean but bleeding steadily. Her hands, she was pleased to note, were perfectly steady as she cleaned the wound with antiseptic. He didn't flinch, just watched her, his gaze intense. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of gauze and the drumming of the rain. Her touch was professional, impersonal, but the proximity was electric. She was intensely aware of the heat of his skin, the solid muscle under her fingers, the faint scent of blood and cedar. "I never stopped looking for you," he said quietly, his voice a low vibration in the still room. It was not a declaration of love. It was a confession of a 7-year obsession, a single-minded pursuit that had now brought war to her doorstep. She finished wrapping the bandage, her movements precise. She met his gaze, her own unflinching. "I know," she replied, her voice just as quiet. "That's what I was afraid of." The honesty of the exchange hung between them, more dangerous and intimate than any lie. He had claimed her with his search, and she had acknowledged it with her fear. He reached out, his uninjured hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. His touch was warm, possessive. "You cannot stay here. None of you. You will pack a bag. We leave in 10 minutes. This was it. The end of her life, as she knew it. There was no more running, no more hiding. His world had found her, and it was dragging her back in, this time with 2 small, innocent lives in tow. She could fight him, but she knew it was pointless. The photograph proved that. Her only path to her daughter's safety was through him. She nodded, pulling her hand away from his. "I'll get the girls." In their room, Hannah and Duri were sleeping soundly, tangled together under a brightly colored quilt. Their faces were peaceful, innocent of the violence that had just unfolded a few feet away. A wave of love so fierce it was painful washed over Zara. She would do anything for them. She would walk into fire. She would make a deal with the devil himself. And she had. She woke them gently, murmuring reassurances as she dressed them in warm clothes. "We're going on a little trip," she told them, her voice miraculously calm. An adventure. Duri was suspicious, but Hannah was excited. Zara packed a single bag, just as she had 7 years ago. But this time, it was filled with small sweaters, picture books, and a well-loved stuffed rabbit. This time, she wasn't running from him. She was running with him. As they prepared to leave, walking past the hastily repaired front door, Duri dropped the worn rabbit. It fell to the floor, forgotten in the rush. Zara saw the glint first, a tiny star of light from the wooded area across the street. A sniper's scope. Her mind didn't have time to process the fear. It only acted. Jinwoo was ushering Hannah toward the open door of a black, armored car his men had waiting. In a split second, Zara saw the trajectory, the target. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She shoved him. Hard. She threw her body against his, pushing him and Hannah down, behind the solid metal of the car door. The motion sent her stumbling out into the open for a fraction of a second. A crack echoed through the night, and a chip of concrete exploded from the walkway right where Jinwoo's head had been. The action was pure instinct, a mother's desperate, sacrificial gambit. It gave his men the opening they needed. Two of them returned fire into the darkness, and the threat was neutralized. Inside the car, the doors slammed shut, encasing them in a world of muffled silence and the smell of leather. Jinwoo pulled her against him, his grip almost painful. His hand tangled in her hair, his face pressed into the curve of her neck. He was breathing heavily, the facade of his control finally cracking. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't say anything at all for a long moment. He just held her. Then he whispered her name, Zara. The way he said it was different. It was stripped of all arrogance and command. It was rough with an emotion he would never name. It was an acknowledgement, a claim, a recognition that she had just saved him, had saved them all. The debt was no longer one-sided. The car sped through the rain-slicked suburban streets, leaving her small, violated house behind. She watched the life she had known disappear in the rear-view mirror, a ghost in the storm. The cost was absolute. Her freedom, her peace, her anonymity, all sacrificed on the altar of her children's safety. She had paid for their survival with the rest of her life. They arrived at a penthouse that seemed to float in the sky, its windows a wall of glass overlooking the sprawling, glittering expanse of Seoul. It was a beautiful cage. His men took the sleepy girls and gently put them to bed in a room that was larger than Zara's entire house. She was left standing in the center of the vast living room, the city lights a cold fire at her feet. She walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass, a barrier between her and the world. He came to stand behind her, his presence a solid wall at her back. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his heat, his focus. He was watching her reflection in the glass. "This is their world now," he said, his voice a low murmur. "They will be safe here. I will keep them safe." She looked at his reflection, the sharp suit, the bandaged arm, the unyielding set of his jaw. Then she looked at her own, the simple pink dress, now rumpled and stained, the exhaustion in her eyes, but also a new, hard strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had faced down his past, his enemies, and his truth, and she was still standing. She didn't answer him. She didn't have to. The choice had been made the moment she picked up that knife, the moment she shoved him out of a sniper's path. She turned her gaze back to the city, to the endless, pulsing lights of the empire he commanded. Her empire now, too, whether she wanted it or not. She did not move away from him. She just stayed there, watching the city that now owned her, her children, and the man who had brought the storm back to her door, and this time had promised to shield her with his own body.